Okay, hello. Welcome. Congratulations. I'm saying it formally for the whole world to hear. Nate and Johanna. Okay. May God bless you to have an eternal union and bring much light into this world. Both your unique lights join as one and create even a greater energy and illuminate all you come in contact with, all in good health and beautiful blessings. Okay. We'll dedicate the class to you guys. To Nate and Johanna. Okay. To Nate and Johanna. So the topic tonight is two conflicting voices. The battle of the twins. Small introduction. I've repeated this introduction many times over the last 35 years now that this class has been going. Yes, older than some of you in this room. And that is, growing up in a traditional Jewish home myself, one of the great challenges, whether you grow up observant Jewish, traditional Jewish, whatever, all the different titles and labels, whatever they mean, you all know my opinion on all these labels anyway, so it's hard to quantify beings as labels. However, whoever you are and whatever background a person is, the key operative word that is so lacking is relevance, spiritual relevance. To find spiritual relevance in one's traditions, in the Torah, in Judaism, and the truth is, for that matter, in any faith or religion, is the key challenge, because very often religion has become rendered into a series of rituals. Ritual without the SBI before it, as in spiritual, it ends up being, can end up being robotic, mechanical, cultural, and all the other so-called non-stagnant elements in our lives. Because people do things because their parents did it, because the community does it, peer pressure, education, and so on. Which is why so many people rebelled, so to speak, in the time of the Enlightenment, when they were able to find their so-called train out of here, which freed them from all the, what some felt religious oppression and all the pressures. Many people claiming, I've never found my own voice, who am I? When I was told what to do and how to do it and when to do it by people who were older than me with all kinds of threats of retribution and punishment should one not comply. And hence you have the whole stereotype of conformity, and especially religious conformity. So the fact is, any society you grow up in, whether one's an atheist, an agnostic, or a person of faith, there's always an element of conformity, because that's how human beings are. There's a certain comfort zone. We will be influenced by our early impressions, as impressionable children, by our parents first, and then by our families and our communities and our schools, and all the influences that come our way. So whoever you are, no matter what, nobody comes with a clean slate. You grow into an adult based on influences that have shaped a very tender, innocent, and vulnerable mind. Because children, that's what they are. They are very innocent, very pure, like freshly fallen snow. And analogy, a beautiful analogy that captures it, like a warm ball of wax. So every impression that happens, that is impressed on that wax, will become part of the personality of the wax as it hardens into an adult. And then it's not that easy to just melt the wax and reprogram yourself. Why? Because if you melt the wax, you melt all of it, and that's not always so pleasant. So you have a situation where children are actually defenseless, and I say it actually both in a positive and a negative way, because if they are around good environments, so that defenselessness and that impressionability and vulnerability turns into a beautiful thing. You can shape it any way you wish, in a good way, a beautiful way. But unfortunately, if it's subject to forces that are hostile or oppressive or abusive or suppressive and repressive and all the oppressives, oppressive, repressive, suppressive. Okay, I think oppressive is the worst. The suppressive is a little less, and they're all no good. Let's put it this way: they all oppress you. No pun intended. So then, of course, the impressions are not positive ones. Now, in most cases, I would say that most of us grow up with some positive impressions, some negative ones. So people growing up in very horrendous, dysfunctional, abusive homes, obviously their wax has been quite wounded and scarred. Those that grow up in beautiful, nurturing homes, their wax is, as it hardens, is very different. And frankly, it's not something you can really hide, because this isn't something you can keep secret. The place you immediately see what the hardened wax looks like is in relationships. You could fake it at work, you could fake it at parties, you could fake it what faces you put on what masks you wear. But when it comes to building a home, your own home, and having children, there are no lies. Because who you are will be expressed there one way or the other. If you have a lot of rage inside of you, it's going to be expressed there. If you have a lot of dysfunctionality and inability to know how to love, to know how to trust, to how to be trusted, it's all going to come out. So those forces that shape us as children, the first place they will express themselves in the most obvious way is in the family life. And that's why you'll see people in therapy, whether it's marital therapy or family therapy or individual therapy, it usually begins with something in areas of relationships. Obviously, there are people who get caught up in addictions or other situations that are not connected to other people, and they too need work, and they need help. But very often, people make it through the teen years, everything seems to be fine, but as soon as they fall in love for the first time, or as soon as there's something serious, their emotions are suddenly open to a serious relationship, that's where all hell breaks loose, so to speak, because then are they equipped? How do we know what emotions? How do we know how to use our emotions in a healthy way? How to love, how not to overlove and not to underlove, how to have the right boundaries while also the closeness and intimacy. So as soon as you enter into that realm, a person whose wax, and when it was warm in their childhood, was shaped the wrong way, they just simply don't have the tools and the skills to deal with a mature relationship. So people will do is they'll hide, denial, they'll fake it, they'll put on a show. But at some point there comes the day of reckoning, because every relationship has a point where are you committed or you're not committed. And I know people who go for years and non-committed. There's serial daters. There's serial murderers and there's serial daters. We know murder is worse, but serial daters for the psyche could also be pretty bad. Because basically you're just going on and on with the fear of commitment, the uncertainty, whatever the reasons are. I'm not really here I'm not trying to depict or paint a critical picture. I'm just really painting a realistic picture that I know resonates for many people when they hear this, because it's exactly what happened. Their childhood shaped their wax. The analogy of the warm wax, as it's defined and shaped in our childhood, has shaped them a certain way. And they hit their own relationships, they're ill-equipped or under-equipped and not really out of their natural waters. That's the bad news, so to speak. The good news is that even though it's true we can't warm the whole wax again and we can't turn the clock back and rebuild our childhoods, however, there are many ways that we can re-access. We have souls. Being that we're not dead corpses, thank God. So we're not in a stationary, inanimate state. Just as we were shaped that way, we can reshape things. And you see it, first of all, in the world of healing. Look at the miracles of healing. Like any good doctor will tell you, doctors are not healers. They're facilitators to help generate the healing process that's natural to everybody. To get rid of the impediments, to speed up the process. We have a doctor in the house, actually. Am I correct? He's not going to disagree with the rabbi. But anyway, there's no name, no one knows who you are, so you're not endorsing anything I'm saying. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to be dispensing medical advice anyway. I'm just discussing the process. So healing, look at healing. Just look, your finger gets a cut, and what happens unless there's unusual circumstances? The natural process will begin. The blood will clot, there'll be a scab, it'll fall off, and heal. Just on a basic level that we all see. Obviously there are wounds and scars that go deeper and that need more intervention. And sometimes even worse than that, surgery and so on. But there is a healing process, and it really amazes anyone that watches it in every part of the body in the most amazing fashion. What do you see from that? That if it was just like a stone, let's say, if we were like stones, and someone broke a stone into half, that's it. You could try to glue it back together. What do they do with Humpty Dumpty? The metaphorical Humpty Dumpty. or you can try to do other things. But something that's inanimate, essentially, even though the truth is, let's be honest, even a stone is not inanimate, there are subatomic particles, etc., etc. But we'll talk on an ostensible level, it's a pretty inanimate entity. And they have not yet figured out how to connect atoms to take a shattered stone and turn it back into a complete stone. But my point is when it comes, however, to human being, we're not just inanimate entities. We are life forces. I'll call it a soul. You can call it energy. Call it whatever you want. And as such, that soul, that spirit, the life force within us, has healing powers, has regenerative powers to correct things. I mean, the miracle, for example, even on a neurological level, where neurons will, neurological paths can be formed after a stroke. Now, yes, it's true that there are certain organs, God forbid, if they're severed, they're not going to grow back. But much in the body, much of it, is capable of that. And even now, there's advances in medicine that predict that not in a long time from now, you'll be able to even regenerate other parts of the body through the whatever stem cell or DNA manipulation, genetic engineering, etc., etc. The point I'm making here is that we are not what it seems to be, that damaged goods. It's not like something happened to you and you just, that's it, too late. It's true it's more difficult. It's far, far easier, as Frederick Douglass said, to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. But it doesn't mean it's not fixable. The most important reason it's to remember is that we're not even dealing here necessarily with physical. Physical, you can say, okay, you know something? God forbid an organ, a limb, in some way was damaged, maybe there'll remain a scar. But here we're talking about the spirit, or we'll call it the psyche. And the psyche is far more dynamic and far more flexible and dexterous and resilient than the body is. Because the soul and the spirit we don't really fully understand. Was there really damage done to a child's soul, let's say if it grew up in an abusive home? Or was the damage done, so to speak, to the arteries that connect that soul to our conscious selves? So it's a good question. Was the unconscious really hurt? Or was the connection of the unconscious to your conscious experience hurt? And if the latter is true, and the latter is true, as I shall soon discuss, then it's a whole other story. Then it's a matter of reconnecting, so-called, to the power state, the source, and regenerating energy to compensate for that which may be lacking. For example, if a person did not have love in their lives, I mean using an extreme example, but deprived of a lot of love. Think of it like a flower that was deprived of being watered. Now, and we know that a flower could die, but let's talk about a flower that hasn't died. There's still some life in it. So we know that with the right care, you can slowly regenerate the energy in the flower, and you can see sometimes even in a garden or in a field that seems parched and all that, with the right nurturing, you can regenerate. In the human level, that means if a person was deprived of love, so it's true that may have shaped them, and they may have a very negative attitude about themselves, because if you're not loved, you start not loving yourself, and you feel invalidated and insecure and all that. But here's an example. A person then finds someone that does love them, and they find someone to love. That can compensate and sometimes even replace, and more than that, the nurturing that they should have received. Now again, it's harder, but it's not impossible. And that's why in the morning prayer, one of the most beautiful prayers we say every morning, we say, Moda'ani, in the morning we say, I thank you for returning my soul to me. And then we continue on and say, Neshama Shenasatabi, this soul that you've given me is pure, Taharahi. You've created it, you've shaped it, you've instilled it within me, and you protect it within me. And every one of those words are very precise. I'll discuss them a little more a little later. But the point I want to make is that it's a declaration. Even every morning, no matter what happened yesterday, or the day before, or 10 years before, 30 years ago, your soul was never damaged. The connection between the soul and your conscious mind and heart and your life experiences may have been obstructed, may have been somewhat compromised. But that means that, think of it like this, the reservoir remains intact. The pipes may have corroded, they may be rusty and so on. And what you want to do is open those pipes back so you should access the purity and the innocence that you have within your soul. So think of the soul like a pilot flame. I'm using different analogies. A pilot flame. The pilot flame never goes out. Ani yeshena v'li be'er King Solomon writes in the Song of Songs. It means I'm asleep, but my heart is awake. I mean, it's for him an expression of love. That even when you're asleep, your heart is awake. Love is 24/7, even though you may not be consciously aware of it. But if you truly love someone, you don't love them only when you're awake and when you're thinking about them. You love them even when you're not thinking about them. So the same is true. The soul is always there, even when the outer dimensions may be asleep. And it's a matter of learning how to access it. Now, I said all this as a long introduction, going back to my class. I always give this introduction, relevance, the relevance of Judaism and Torah to our lives. Not just mechanical, not just robotic, not just conformist, based on, as I said, our childhood experiences and parents, but to learn how to find relevance. And of course, I focus mostly on the Torah, the Jewish holidays, but always the universal dimension. Therefore, what I share here is for people of all backgrounds and all faiths and no faiths, or whatever it may be, because these ideas are universal in the human condition of our searching for a certain element of peace, of love, of truth, of soul, of transcendence in our lives. So though this was an introduction to the general class, it also happens to be an introduction that's very fitting to the topic. As I said, two conflicting voices, the battle of the twins. And this is referring to an episode in this week's chapter, one of the classic biblical stories. You know, there's the 5-6 biblical stories everybody knows. The Garden of Eden, good and evil, the flood, Exodus from Egypt. I mean, most of them due to the popularity in cinema, modern cinema, was the Ten Commandments or the Prince of Egypt and so on. But then there's also the classic story with Jacob and Esau, the wrestling, the battling twins. And of course later the story with the Jacob wrestling with the angel. May not be as popular as some of the other stories, but it's still pretty well known. And though it happened thousands of years ago, yet in it lies tremendous lessons, psychological, profound psychological, emotional, and spiritual lessons for us today. And not forced. When you read it properly, and you hear the story in that context, not just as an episode that happened so long ago, it really comes alive, and you're like, it could be, I mean, I speak for myself. It blows you away that such a story so many years ago has such relevance in our contemporary society. So exactly that. These twins are at battle from the moment that they're conceived, basically. In their mother's womb, they're already fighting. That's where the chapter begins. And Rebecca, who's their mother, has these twins struggling within. And she has a terrible pregnancy, terrible pain. She turns to God. Why am I in such pain? Why is this a hard? She recognized it was a difficult pregnancy. She never had children before, but she saw others. She had a mother, and she had, I guess, family and so on. So God said to her, because you have two nations within you, and they're struggling for dominance, for control. When this one rises, this one will fall. When this one rises, the other one rises, the other one will fall. And yes, exactly what happens. They come when they're born. They are very different. The Bible puts it very, very succinctly. It says, and poignantly, that Esau, ish sayed, ish Muhammad yedid sayed. He was a warrior, man of war. He knew how to hunt. He knew how to trap. He was a great war strategist. And then there was Jacob, his alter ego, antithesis. Jacob, ish yeshiv aholim, ish tam yeshiv aholim. Man of, you could say, tam means wholesomeness, innocence, peace, completeness. The scholar. So you have the warrior and the scholar. And these are twins. And they look different, they behave differently, but they're twins. And they struggle first in the pregnancy, then in their early childhood, and throughout their lives, the story of their struggles. I've discussed this chapter many times in different contexts. I want to talk about the struggle itself and how it reflects on our lives. And this doesn't even require a lot of thinking. If you just ask yourself, where are the struggles in your own life? So we all have conflicts. Who doesn't have conflicts? Sometimes we think we're like multiple personalities, at least a dual personality. We have struggles, the different voices inside of us. Our heart tells us one thing, our mind tells us another. Yeah. You have the voice of survival, the egocentric voice, the voice that is self-absorbed, my needs, my gratification. I need to take care of myself. And then you have the other voice. The voice says, no, help another. The voice of transcendence, the voice of higher purpose. And everyone has these two voices. How much time each voice has in your in your life, only you know. Maybe it would be a good exercise. I know you need a little time and concentration to, like in a day, take like a type of survey. Maybe we should make an app like that. That's a good idea. Where when you have this voice speaking to you and this voice speaking to you, just to figure out like who's a louder voice and who dominates, and how do you act when the two voices conflict. Obviously, if we don't pay much attention, we all know where the default is going to go. The lower common denominator, the easier approach, which is always self. It's like gravity. You let something, you don't pay any effort, the inertia is just going to fall and just go downward. However, when you apply yourself and you think about it, you reflect, then usually the mind has more say than the heart. You don't reflect the heart, the impulsive heart is generally more powerful. Not because it's more powerful, because you're not allowing yourself to fight it or to resist it. But we all know intelligent people, when someone makes you an offer in business or in other ways, if you're intelligent, but you don't just buy into it because emotionally the person manipulated you or was able to make a good sale, your mind, your reflective mind says, I have to think about it. And if you're trying to retain some objectivity, there's pros and there's cons, and you come back and say, you know what? It may seem appealing, it feels good and all that, but it's not for me. Unfortunately, most of us go the other way. That's why we make mistakes. How many times has someone, let's say, insulted you or said something to you that you took as a negative, you reacted immediately in a very angry way or a very retaliatory way. A day or two pass and you regret why you reacted that way, because then you actually find out that the person never meant it, and so on and so forth. There's a perfect example of an impulsive reaction. Had you reflected another day, you still could come back and say, hey, something, something, it's inappropriate what you did. But we don't think like that. The heart doesn't think, period. It reacts. It's an impulsive reaction, knee-jerk. The mind should be telling the heart, something? Let's put the brakes on, let's reflect, let's think it over, let's consult, and then we could always go back and determine, maybe we should respond, maybe best to overlook, maybe move on. What I'm saying here is daily little conflicts we have. Sometimes they have not much significance, they're just minor, trivial things, but sometimes they're very significant. They can be even matters of life and death and major decisions that we make. And now, of course, a lot of this is much more complicated, because it's not just, okay, if you're able to just identify, here's your impulsive heart, here's your reflective mind, great. The problem is it gets so convoluted, your heart is convincing your mind that it's subjective. That's part of the problem. In Tanya, here's a brilliant chapter 9, where he describes this conflict, and he says, just like the blood of the heart rushes to the mind and brain, because the brain needs blood, so too the impulsive emotions of the heart rush to the mind and make the mind think to justify your subjective position. How often have we been guilty of that? Now, most people don't like to admit that, and they may not even know it. That bias and prejudices are affecting your mind, and you really change your arguments due to a subjective position. This is why we have honesty, integrity, recusing yourself in a position, let's say a judge or another person who's in the power of to make a decision. If you have an interest, you should recuse yourself, etc. Because the fact of the matter is, bias blinds us, and bias, prejudice blinds even the wise. That's how it is, and that's the nature of the beast. The only thing is, you're expected to acknowledge that, and then you can get some control over it. So it gets very mixed up, because many decisions in our life, we may think we made a rational, objective decision, when in fact it was based on an emotional impulse that dressed up and masqueraded like an intellectual argument. That's what we're very good at. Smart people are excellent at covering their tracks and finding ways to make sure everybody else is to blame, etc., etc. Like the guy that goes to the psychiatrist and convinces him that he's the one that's a madman, and he should be locked up, and the patient should be the psychiatrist. There are smart people that can do that. I'm not saying they're always wrong. Many psychiatrists maybe need their own help. Some people who are in that field, that's why they entered that field. But I'm not here to pass judgment on that. That's case by case, But going back to our theme here, so two voices. So the battle of Jacob and Esau are actually a Jacob within you and Esau within you. The description in the Torah of these two personalities are two voices within us. One is the warrior. What's a warrior? A warrior is a conqueror, is a dominator, is aggressive. It's taking care of its own needs. It's a battler. Some people, sharks, they call them in business or in other settings. They are out, they are go-getters, aggressive, ready to step on anyone just to win. And then there's another voice. The other voice is the ishtam. Now, he's not a strategist, not a manipulative, not that shrewd. The person is an innocent voice that just wants to have some calm and peace, is introspective, studies, prays, soulful. Basically, you could say one is body-like and one is soul-like. And we have both of them within us. And guaranteed, without question, each of you here, everyone listening to this, myself, we can identify things in our day or our lives that are body-like, which means more physical-oriented, basically is driven by our bodily and physical and material needs, say materialism, matter, and spirit. And then there are things that are more spiritually driven. When I say spiritual, I mean in a more broader sense. I don't mean necessarily religious, transcendent. You know, for example, when you're busy with your needs, which is to pay your bills, to take care of your health, or take care of your own eating, sleeping, and so on, then there's the other side of us, transcendent, where we want something beyond the daily quotidian, the daily grind and routine. And some of us express it through art, music, literature, travel, yes, religion, faith, love, romance. Now, of course, these are not mutually exclusive. There's an overlap. There are things that are transcendent that obviously are body and physical related. There are things that are physical that have some type of ethereal and ephemeral nature. But if you were to, generally speaking, there are two voices. And these two voices were put in us. Sometimes they're called the animal soul and the divine soul. Sometimes they're called the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. The good inclination, the negative inclination. And essentially they're the distinction between what I said before, one's own needs, and the other is the transcendent voice. Survival and transcendence, if you wish. Now, frankly, just left at that, without any excess, both are necessary. You need to have a warrior. Who's going to protect you in case there's danger? You do need to be able to hunt. And hunt, I mean this in the broader sense. I don't mean necessarily physically go out and hunt, but I mean to go out and get what you need to survive, to pay your bills, to eat, and so on. The problem becomes when one dominates over the other and one enslaves, actually, it takes hostage the other. In most cases, and this is an expression from Hasidic thought, the soul is imprisoned in the body. What that means is that the body's needs, instant gratification, our temptations, the forces that seduce us, our emotional impulses control the soul's behavior. Because the soul can't travel anywhere without the body. So if the material needs of a person become the dominant force, the soul becomes trapped. And that's called basically the golus, the displacement of the soul within the body. So how the mystics explain it is that Yeridas HaNeshama B'guf, which means the descent of the soul in the body upon conception, when we are born, well, I would say first conceived and then born, basically a spiritual divine soul, Jacob, is entering into a body-like environment, an Esau environment. So right from conception, right in pregnancy, right in the early stages, is already a battle. You know, when you think of it, it is part of the mysteries of existence. But what some point happens is an egg is fertilized by the male seed, right? And it's one cell. At that point, it's barely visible. That cell will begin to multiply. The miracle of creation. Literally a miracle. And pop, here we are, sitting in the room with all our neurosis and all our stuff. You know? It all began with one little cell that you could never imagine would turn into this complex individual that each of us is. Right? Okay. So there's the physiological development, which I'm going to really address here. You know, the stages, the first semester, the first trimester, second, and so on. But there's also more than that going on. It's not just a body developing. We know there's a life